Welcome to the Center Step Racing Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Schuler. Happy 4th of July, everyone. Guess what that means? We're heading to Daytona, the awesome NASCAR tradition. I'm so excited. I love plate racing. I'm just one of those guys who's really into mental racing as well as the physical short tracks on top of that too. So really pumped for this upcoming weekend. Just so you all are aware, if you want to help out and sponsor this podcast, drop me an email, podcast@centerstepracing.com. I'll send you over some information on what you can do and how that will help your business get advertised in multiple areas across my podcast here. So would appreciate that if anyone does have any interest, and we can go ahead and figure out what package works for you guys as far as your business and whatnot. In my last podcast, I did mention Wendy Venturini from Performance Racing Network, or PRN, about the accident back at Sonoma. Wanted to just give a shout out to her. Thankful that she is back home now and recovering. So good news there on that. So last week I asked 6 different trivia questions, which was a little bit more than what I had initially planned on. But obviously being at a road course, I figured we could go ahead and ask a few more. So let me go ahead and just read off what I asked, and then I'll give the answers and see if you guys were correct. So my first question was, who was the inaugural winner at Sonoma? Ricky Rudd in 1989. And get this, he won a whopping $62,000. Yes, 60,000, not million. So, definitely a lot less than what these guys are earning nowadays from their race wins. My second question was, besides Jeff Gordon, who is the only other driver to turn more than 2,000 laps at Sonoma? The answer, Jeff Burton, the other Jeff, with 2,037. And if you wanted to know, Jeff Gordon actually turned 2,343 laps. Now, obviously there are some active drivers that seem to possibly be on pace to hit that mark. So we'll see what happens in the coming years. But at this point, only Jeff Burton has hit 2,000 laps other than Jeff Gordon. How many victories by Pontiac at Sonoma? 2, actually. So Rusty Wallace snatched a win in 1990, and Tony Stewart when he was driving for Joe Gibbs back in 2001. Both of those wins in those years were by a Pontiac car. The worst starting spot by a winner in the same race at Sonoma, 32nd. That was done by Juan Pablo Montoya in 2007. Now, the next year, Kyle Busch won from the 30th position. So in case you guys were thinking Kyle Busch, you weren't too far off. So not bad, but, if you lose by a couple tenths of a second, you still lose. Anyway, going on to the next question. How many different names has Sonoma Raceway been called? Well, there's one, but it's actually technically, and I might get some pushback from this, and we'll see how much fire this causes on Twitter. I don't think so, because there probably won't be too many concerns with this, but technically Sonoma Raceway has gone under 4 different official names. Sonoma Raceway was the first. Infineon Raceway, or Infineon, depending on how you pronounce that. But Infineon Raceway was another one. And then Sears Point International Raceway. And then just Sears Point Raceway. So there's your 4 different names for Sonoma Raceway. So for those of you who have been around the sport for a while, like me, you'll remember when that track was named Sears Point. Then my last trivia question from last week was, name 4 out of 5 drivers with multiple career poles at Sonoma. So again, I just wanted you guys to name 4 out of these 5 with multiple career poles at Sonoma. And I'm going to give you all 5 of the drivers here. So obviously Jeff Gordon's got to be on that list. He actually has 5 career poles at Sonoma, which is an outstanding record for a single road course. Ricky Rudd had 4 poles. Here's one that kind of surprised me. Jamie McMurray has 3 career poles at Sonoma. I don't know if many of you guys have that on your list, but that's one that kind of surprised me. I know he quietly does well there, but that definitely did surprise me. Rusty Wallace having 2 career poles, and Casey Keene was the other one with 2 career poles at Sonoma. All right, so let me go ahead and shift gears. We'll focus on Daytona, and I want to actually focus specifically on the July race with Daytona. So let me go ahead and give you a few trivia questions for this week, and I'll make sure I actually post them on my Twitter handles. Again, that's at JSchuler, JSCHUOLER. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. I'm all over the place, so feel free to give me a follow and tag along as we continue this podcast series. But let me go ahead and give you these trivia questions. First question, who won the first July race at Daytona? And I will go ahead and just say I'm including both Daytona Beach and Daytona International Speedway, however you want to view it, but just the first July race at Daytona, who won that one? That's my first question. Second trivia question, what's the fastest qualifying speed for a July Daytona race by the Cup Series? What is the fastest qualifying speed for a July Daytona race by the Cup Series? And my final question, I'll keep it at 3 this time. How many times has the Cup Series raced on Independence Day at Daytona? And you're talking about, Grand National Series, Winston Cup, Nextel Cup, Sprint Cup, and then now the Monster Energy Cup Series. But the top NASCAR Touring Series, how many times have they raced on July 4th at Daytona? So those are my 3 trivia questions. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter and take a look at those. Give your votes in, and we'll see if you're right or wrong next week. So let me go ahead and just go into the podcast here. We'll get started with congratulating the race winners. Obviously, Brett Moffitt, which, by the way, if you remember, we'll talk a little bit about this here in a second, went from no sponsorship to obviously a last lap turn of events to win that race. So great work out there, buddy. Kyle Larson dominating the Xfinity Series and taking the win, giving some honor and recognition to Jason Johnson, who passed away recently. And Kyle Busch with one of, I think, the most exciting races, hands down, this year, and will probably go down as one of the most exciting finishes in a long time. So this is going to be one that will be talked about for years to come, I can guarantee you. So this is going to be a fun podcast for me today. But let me go ahead and get started with the truck race first. Like I said, Brett Moffitt, if you remember, he went into this race having no sponsorship and possibly not being able to race, which kind of scares him, especially when you're talking about a kid who's already been up front, won a couple races, looking forward to competing for a championship, and might have that in jeopardy all of a sudden. Gets some sponsorship. John Hunter Nemechek appears to lose an engine, lose fuel, whatever it was, on the last lap. And his new sponsor, who decides to jump on board at the last second, gets some pretty serious recognition. Talk about a dream come true. I mean, there's no way you can come up with a story better than that. Especially when you see these young kids coming into the sport with some serious talent and then being able to get some backing like that, and not just have a team on pit road, but a team in the business industry, in the entrepreneur world, also give some trust to these kids up and coming in this sport. That's pretty amazing. I'm excited to see where the sport's going to go in the coming years with these young kids coming up and bringing either new sponsors or continuing on with some of the long-term sponsors who have been around the sport. So that's exciting for Brett Moffitt and his team. Congratulations to you guys. Looking forward to hopefully see you compete for a championship later this year. So for those of you looking to sponsor a NASCAR team, that's one to definitely keep an eye on if you hear of anything, and definitely want to look for some sponsorship opportunities. For the Xfinity race, Kyle Larson goes from last to first and honors Jason Johnson with his win. If you don't know, Jason Johnson, he races in the World of Outlaws. He died last week from injuries sustained in a crash at the Beaver Dam Raceway out in Wisconsin. And that's one thing I really admire about Kyle Larson. I know there's, especially with this situation in this race, there really wasn't as much backlash as usual, but there usually is with a lot of Cup drivers coming into the Xfinity Series, which I'm glad there wasn't, especially with Jason's passing away last week. But that's one thing I admire about Larson. He never forgets where he came from. So when people who race from his home track or race in a dirt race or series that's similar to where he came from, and either they pass away or they get a serious injury of some sort, it seems to hit him a little bit more on the personal level, and that's something that I feel that a lot of drivers have forgotten. And you've probably seen it too, where Kevin Harvick and Tony Stewart have talked about how NASCAR needs to kind of go back to the grassroots. And I think Kyle Larson is living out that example right now. He doesn't really necessarily talk about it much as far as the grassroots conversation that Harvick and Stewart are talking about. But if you look at how he continues to talk about the World of Outlaws and where he came from, he never forgets that. And that's just something I admire about him. He's very humble with that, and I think if every driver did that, we'd be seeing a lot more different type of competition out there. So obviously, let's just cut to the chase and talk about the Buzz. Hands down, one of the most exciting races of the year with the Cup Series. And I'll tell you what, I'm not a fan of mile and a halves, but the race that we saw between Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch, and then the race at the end between Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch, made it one of the most exciting races of the year, if not the most. So a lot of drivers at the Xfinity race needed extra water, ice packs, things like that. At the Cup race, same thing when everyone came down. I guess even some drivers needed some extra ice packs to shove in their suits during some of the pit stops and whatnot. So the heat may have gotten to a couple of drivers, and that may have caused them to race a bit more aggressively. That can happen sometimes. But the biggest buzz that's been going on is, were they dirty moves or was it just good racing? So let me talk about the situation between Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch, and let me just put you in the driver's seat for a second. If I'm Kurt Busch, I'm just assuming that my teammate will give me some slack. I don't care if it's Kevin Harvick, Eric Almirola, Clint Bowyer, or Danica Patrick, a year or two ago. I don't care who they are. If it's my teammate, I'm expecting them to give me a little bit of slack. And especially when we're coming to the green-white checkered, it's not the end of the race. We're not going to, pinch each other up to the wall to where you can't even fit a paper between the car and the wall or between our cars kind of thing. But obviously Kurt was wrong. And if I'm Kevin Harvick, I'm sitting there in second. I know my teammate a little bit more than I do the rest of the competition. So I know how Kurt Busch drives, I know how he defends, and I know how he'll race me just a little bit more than everyone else. So that's how I have the advantage of knowing how I can get around him, because I already know his weaknesses and I already know inside his head some part of what he's thinking. And I think that's exactly what we saw at the end of that stage, where Kevin Harvick snuck around the outside. I don't know how he fit in there on the outside, but my gosh, looking at the replay, you couldn't see anything between his car and the wall and between Kurt Busch and Kevin Harvick. So obviously Kurt Busch being a little frustrated over the radio, I get that. I understand that. And I think Kurt Busch did the right thing, just kind of let it all out at once. And then you could tell about 10 seconds later, boom, he was right back to focused on finishing out that race. So very exciting finish there. Now, Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson, was it a dirty move or was it clean, good, hard racing? And I'm just going to say right now, especially to all you Kyle Busch haters, that was fair game. And here's the racing etiquette. And I think Dale Earnhardt even said something along this line too, where you hit me once, I'll hit you twice kind of thing. And Kyle Larson pinched Busch up into the wall, tried to do that slide job, ended up alongside him, tagged him in that left rear, and put Kyle Busch in the wall a little bit. But they both kept wheeling it and both kept racing. And so that means the ball has now gone over to Kyle Busch's side of the court, and it's now Kyle Busch's turn to do a little payback. In racing etiquette, that is completely normal. That's not aggressive. That's not passive aggressive, whatever you want to call it. That is what we call absolute fair game. If someone pinches you up into the wall, you have all the right to do the same, if not a little bit more, either in the next corner or in some cases, and I've seen this, I'll explain this in a little bit, but you'll even see some people talk about, oh, he wrecked me 6 years ago at such and such track back when we were in some other series. You'll see that, especially if you go to short tracks. Go to your local short track. Watch a full season at your local short track and keep going for about 5-6 years. You'll start seeing where the rivalries are and where one person wrecked another person, and a few years later, you'll see that person that got wrecked finally get his chance to do some payback. You'll see that happen. Drivers don't have a short-term memory. They have a very long-term memory. They know exactly who wrecked who, at what track, at what event, in what year, and will always keep that in the back of their mind every single race. And if they have a chance to where they feel they can pay back that other person on an equal level, if not more, then they'll do it. If they don't think they can pay back enough to where it's, that wasn't quite what you did for me. You didn't quite ruin my day that bad. You'll see drivers actually be patient. Doesn't this sound a little familiar? Matt Kenseth and Joey Logano fans? That's exactly what happened there. That's exactly what happened. Joey Logano went up and spun Kenseth out. That spin resulted in Kenseth not making the next round of the chase. What did you see? Everyone says that they saw Matt Kenseth go 2 laps down and get wrecked by go wreck Joey Logano at Martinsville. No. Here's exactly what happened. Matt Kenseth put Joey Logano in the back of his mind and said, you ruined my chances for going after a championship, so I am going to wait until the opportune moment to ruin your chances for going after a championship. It could be this year, it could be next year, it could be 5 years from now, who knows? But you better keep your eye out. That's why they call Dale Earnhardt the Intimidator. You barely brush up against him. You hear this from drivers all the time. They barely brush up against him, and they're always shivering when they see that black good wrench in their mirror, all up against their bumper. Oh gosh, is he going to spin me out? What is he going to do? And then the next thing you know, he just gets right by you. He intimidated you. So at Martinsville, if you don't remember exactly what happened, there was actually one separate incident that happened just before Kenseth took Logano out. If you remember, on a restart, Kenseth got spun by both Keselowski and Logano, who happened to be teammates. So now let me put you in Matt Kenseth's mind. Okay, here's exactly what Kenseth thought. Oh, so I first get wrecked by Logano, and now I'm getting ganged up by his teammate? And that's where you saw Kenseth hit his limit. You can even see the most timid drivers lose their cool and become some of the most furious villains out on the track. Like that. And that's exactly what you saw with Kenseth. You saw that switch flip, and 2 laps down with a beat up front grille, he didn't care. He was just waiting for this little yellow 22 car to come around the track. 2 laps down? I don't care. I'm gonna ruin his chances for a championship just like him and his punk teammate. Yeah, did he exactly say that? I don't know. But that's what I would be saying if that were my seat. That's exactly what would be going on in my head. That would be exactly my intentions. And that's exactly what we saw. Now, obviously that's an extreme example, but if you kind of tone it down a little bit, you saw the exact same thing here at Chicagoland between Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson. Larson put Kyle Busch into the wall in turn 2. And let me tell you what, that's the first mistake Larson did. He should have waited to turn 4. Why? Because then Kyle Busch doesn't have another turn to get back at him in the same race. But what did Larson do? He pinched him up into the wall in turn 2, and thus gave Kyle Busch one turn to give immediate payback. And in Kyle Busch's mind, which, let's just be a little honest here, he has a little shorter fuse than the average driver in the field, hit his limit. And what did he do? He completely overdrove turn 3. I mean, look at it. He drove below the apron. He had 2 tires below the white line onto the apron. The car went completely upset and he slams. He doesn't just bump. He literally takes his chrome horn and puts it in the back seat almost of Kyle Larson and completely spins him out. He puts himself into the wall in the middle of 3 and 4. That is how bad Kyle Busch wanted to give payback to Larson. Oh, you're going to try to ruin this race for me and sneak in a win? I don't think so. And what did Kyle Busch do? He put him into the wall. Well, spun him out, and Larson did an absolute fantastic job of saving it. They both finished 1-2. Larson didn't completely wreck. Kyle Busch didn't completely wreck. Both of them had absolute beat-up cars. I would love to get that race to win die cast. I'm talking to you, Lionel. But at the same time, that's fair game right there. I could go on with other examples too. I mean, you're looking at just one of the more recent ones besides Kenseth and Logano, Tony Stewart and Denny Hamlin in Sonoma. Stewart probably felt that, oh man, I slightly overdrove turn 7, and Hamlin took advantage of it and gave me a little rub to sneak on by. And guess what happened? Turn 11, Hamlin slightly overdrove it, and Tony Stewart paid him back and shoved Hamlin right into the wall to get his last win. And then, come on, how can we forget the rivalry between Dale Earnhardt and Terry Labonte at Bristol? 95 and 99. Both of them beating and banging on each other. Terry Labonte won the 95 race and Earnhardt won the 99 one. So there's plenty of that going on. In fact, I think it was Race Hub. They did a live poll on Twitter while they were having their show air. And 71% said it was fair game. And I agree with AJ Allmendinger, who was on the show. And he was completely blown, his mind just completely blown as far as, what's this 29% that says no, this wasn't fair game? And he was kind of half joking, I think, saying it was all the Kyle Busch haters. But anyway, with that said, definitely one to watch again and again. You'll be seeing it all over the place with YouTube and different things like that. If you don't know, NASCAR actually uploads the full race on YouTube. So go ahead and check that out. If you haven't seen the finish at least, definitely one to watch for sure. Both the end of, I believe it was stage 2 with Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch, and then the end of the race between Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch. Definitely worth watching. Alright, so my next section here, I call it between a rock and a hard race here, but there was someone, and I won't say his name because he's very legendary in the sport and I respect him a lot, but I respectfully disagree. But the question was, who is the best team in the Cup Series? And Brett Bodine says, Joe Gibbs Racing. And I have a poll right now on Twitter there's 4 options. You can choose between Stewart-Haas Racing, Joe Gibbs Racing, Team Penske, or another team. Go ahead and cast your vote on Twitter right now. Again, follow me on there at JSchuler, JSchuler, and vote on that. I want to get your thoughts on there, but Brett Bodine says JGR. Now, let me go ahead and switch over to a website called racingreference.info. It's actually racing-reference.info if you're trying to type it out. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the driver standings because, again, like I said, I respectfully disagree. I do not think Joe Gibbs Racing is the strongest team out there. Sure, Kyle Busch is leading the points. I'll give you that. Sure, Kyle Busch has the most and will probably have the most and potentially will lock in the most bonus points going into the chase. I will wholeheartedly agree with that because you can't lie with the numbers that are showing right now. Kyle Busch is leading this season. He's been the most consistent. He's been running at the finish in all but one race this year. He's led the second most laps. He's tied for the most poles this year. He's now tied for the most wins this year. He's tied for the most top 10s this year. And he's got the highest average finish with a 6.8. But let me give you a breakdown of the points. Because if you're talking about a stable, a owner team as a whole, that Joe Gibbs Racing is the strongest stable out there, there's absolutely no way. And here's why. Let's say Joe Gibbs Racing was the strongest out there. You have Kyle Busch leading the points. Then you have Denny Hamlin, who doesn't have a win, sitting in 8th in points. Then you have to go all the way back to, are you ready for this? 14th place in points to Eric Jones. The next one in line, as far as the JGR stable, obviously Daniel Suarez back in 18th position. How can you be the best organization and have 2 of your guys outside of the top 12 in points? Like that blows my mind. Okay, are you ready for this? Chase Elliott, Jimmy Johnson, both of those guys are higher in the points than half of the JGR stable. Weren't we talking about all this year? Wasn't the social media buzz all this year about how poor Hendrick is doing and how bad the Camaros are doing? Kyle Larson is sitting there in 9th overall. So how can you say that JGR is the best stable out there right now? You can't. There's no way. Look at Stewart-Haas, which, if you haven't figured by now, that's my vote. Stewart-Haas already has a 1-2-3 finish earlier this year. You have Kevin Harvick sitting in 2nd overall in points with 5 wins, tied for most top 10s, tied for most wins, has the most laps led, and has the 2nd average finish among everyone. Okay? So here's the other part to that. Clint Bowyer is very quietly sitting in 6th overall in points. He's the only other driver besides Joey Logano, so the 4th driver, with an average finish of 10th or better at a 9.9. Oh, and by the way, he has 2 wins. So if Kyle Busch has 5 and none of the other JGR stable has wins, how are they the better team? How are they the better stable? You have Clint Bowyer sitting there in 6th, Kurt Busch in 7th, and Eric Almirola getting this revival of a career sitting there in 11th place. Oh, only 2 points back of Ryan Blaney there in 10th place. So you have Stewart-Haas within 2 points of having all 4 of their drivers sitting in the top 10 in points. I'm sorry, but the numbers don't lie. And whenever I just randomly decide when I'm watching on TV to see that ticker scroll by of where everyone's running, the guys that are usually in the top 12, 13, 15 or so, pretty much I can see all the Stewart-Haas guys at basically any given moment. I would have to say it would be about the top 20 to top 22 before I start seeing all the Joe Gibbs guys. So when you try to say who's the best stable out there, my vote is definitely Stewart-Haas. But I want to hear your thoughts. Like I said, go on Twitter, check out my poll, go cast your vote. And if you're going to say another team, I want you to tell me why. I want to see what your thoughts are. I welcome people who disagree with me. I'm totally fine with that. But that's just my vote, and the numbers don't lie. So, Stewart-Haas Racing, I feel, is definitely the strongest out there. Let me go ahead and wrap up everything here. I want to talk about a little bit with my home track and home club at Tri-C Carters. If you don't know, I'm one of the officials out there. I help announce a couple of races a year as well. And man, being an official is extremely difficult. We saw some really good, hard, aggressive racing. Not quite like Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch where people are putting each other on the wall, but very, very aggressive racing where people know the limits of their carts and don't touch each other. But there were a couple classes where we saw sloppy racing, and finding that balance is one of the hardest jobs as an official. You have to call what you feel is dirty, but then allow what you feel is clean. And I think that's why those in NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, and so on, I think that's why those guys are the professionals. They know exactly what the limits are on their car, and they know exactly when to go over. So I think that's why those guys are professionals. Alright, so with that said, here's my overdrive. So we'll give the green-white checkered here. So as we come around for the green flag, great finishes by these drivers. Alex Bowman, this was actually his first career back-to-back top 10 finishes in the Cup Series. That's kind of surprising considering how well he did replacing Junior a couple of years ago in the Cup Series. But this was his first career back-to-back top 10 finishes in the Cup Series. So both at Sonoma and at Chicagoland. So great job with the 88 team. Clint Boyer, I know that's a little weird, but his 5th place finish just keeps solidifying my statement in my last podcast that he's going to be that 4th person to contend for a championship at Homestead. And my last one, Paul Menard for grabbing the pole. I heard someone say online or saw a couple comments on Facebook and Twitter where blind squirrels do find a nut once in a while, but that's apparently his 2nd career pole. Paul's not been a strong qualifier, but good job on getting it done at Chicagoland to get your 2nd career pole for the Wood brothers there. As we come around for the white flag, we're going to celebrate some birthdays here. Sterling Marlin on June 30th, Sam Hornish Jr. On June 2nd, and then obviously with all the Daytona memories, here's to a new one coming this weekend. And my checkered flag finish as far as what I'm looking forward to this weekend racing, as far as the action on track, just obviously all the great 4th of July traditions of Daytona racing. So you're going to actually see a lot more mental racing. So action's going to take time to build up for those of you that might not fully understand plate racing, especially some of the newer viewers. Watch for the drivers setting each other up for a pass actually a couple laps before the pass actually starts happening. You're going to start seeing that. You're going to start seeing the middle of the pack start forming up, maybe changing lines or lanes or starting to get close with each other and start bump drafting each other starting in the middle of the pack. And then you'll see that row, eventually that push, move up one car, then another one, and then eventually get up to, 4th, 5th, maybe even 2nd to push that person past the leader. You're going to start seeing some more of that mental racing going on. Not quite like the short track racing and the mile and a half racing that we've been seeing. You're going to see everything be a lot more mental rather than physical. Looking forward to Daytona. Again, go ahead and check out my poll. I'll post those trivia questions on Twitter as well. But feel free to give me a follow, and looking forward to chatting with you guys next week. Bye-bye.